On this episode of True Echo, we bring you the story of one woman's unshakable strength. In a classroom ruled by fear, a young black teacher stepped into chaos and faced the worst bullies in the school. But in just 60 seconds, everything changed. They tried to break her, but what they didn't know was, she came prepared for war. This isn't just a story of discipline. It's a story of transformation, courage, and the unstoppable power of dignity in the face of cruelty. Keep watching. You won't believe what happened next. The rain had stopped, but the sky above Westbridge High still hung heavy, a gray canvas stretched across a tired town. The old school sat at the edge of the neighborhood like a forgotten relic, its bricks stained with time, graffiti curling across its walls like rebellious vines. Inside, the halls echoed with the constant clamor of slamming lockers, defiant laughter, and sharp whispers. Teachers avoided eye contact. Students roamed freely. Order was just a suggestion. And into that storm walked Ms. Kendra Harris. Her footsteps on the cracked sidewalk were steady, confident, even as the cold morning air whipped through her navy blazer. She was young, too young, some would say. Her black curls were tied neatly, and her expression was calm, almost serene. But it was the eyes that stood out, clear, focused, and full of something that no one at Westbridge had seen in a long time: hope. Kendra had heard the rumors before she arrived. Room 204 wasn't just unruly, it was a war zone. Veteran teachers had broken down and walked out in tears. Substitutes vanished before the end of a week. The students were in charge. The worst among them, Tyler, Jason, Brittany, and Malcolm, had carved out a reputation so fearsome that even the janitor refused to clean their side of the room without backup. But Kendra Harris wasn't here for peace. She was here for change. Standing outside room 204, she paused. Her hand adjusted the collar of her blouse. Her eyes didn't miss the cluster of students whispering under the old oak tree. One girl sneered, "She won't last the week." Another boy murmured, "She's the first black teacher I've ever seen here." The door creaked open. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. 32 students froze. Books halted midair. Laughter caught in throats. They were staring at a stranger who didn't belong. A black woman, young, well-dressed, and unshaken. Kendra's heels clicked softly as she walked to the front of the room. She set her bag down. The tension was thick, almost cinematic. 4 pairs of eyes in the back row locked on her with predatory amusement. Tyler Brooks leaned back, his buzzcut catching the flicker of a busted ceiling light. Jason Miller hid his smirk behind a sketchpad. Brittany Clark's gum popped loudly as she rolled her eyes. And Malcolm Jones? Silent, unreadable, but intense. Kendra said nothing. She picked up a piece of chalk, turned to the dusty green board, and wrote, "Ms. Harris." Then, she turned and faced them. "My name is Ms. Harris," she said, her voice even but commanding. "We will learn in this room. We will listen. We will grow." The silence cracked. Jason coughed dramatically. Brittany laughed. Tyler yawned and said loudly, "Probably another diversity hire, huh?" Scattered snickers. Malcolm tapped his pen in a slow rhythm. Kendra's eyes moved over each face, not with anger, but recognition. She saw them. She saw their pain. Their rage. Their insecurity. She also saw herself. Kendra had grown up in places where teachers quit not because of kids, but because of violence. Places where students carried burdens in their backpacks heavier than books. Where being different meant being in danger. So when a paper airplane flew past her shoulder and landed near her feet, Kendra simply bent down, picked it up, and unfolded it slowly. The note read, "Will you cry? We don't like outsiders." And below it, a crude symbol. A line, a dot, and a thin smear of red marker meant to look like blood. The class waited for the reaction. Jason held up his phone to record. Brittany grinned, hungry for humiliation. Kendra read the note aloud. Not very original. But here's some feedback: if you're going to write a threat, at least get the grammar right. Will you cry? Needs a question mark. And if you're going to use hate symbols, try not to smudge the marker next time. A pause. Then something unexpected. She smiled. Not mockingly. Not sarcastically. Just calm, self-possessed strength. The air shifted. Jason lowered his phone slightly. Tyler blinked. Brittany's gum paused mid-pop. And then Kendra continued, seamlessly moving into a lecture on To Kill a Mockingbird. Let's talk about justice, she said. And what it means when someone stands alone against the world. As she spoke, the chill in the room thawed just slightly. Not from warmth, but from confusion. They had expected fear. Anger. Retaliation. But this unnerved them. Still, they weren't done. Jason waited until she turned her back again, then dropped his textbook to the floor with a crash. Brittany raised her hand with exaggerated slowness and asked, Miss Harris, why does the whole town hate the black guy in the book? Is it because he's just too different? Another round of hushed chuckles. But Kendra didn't flinch. She faced Brittany and said, That's an excellent question. Why do people fear what they don't understand? Let's explore that. She turned the insult into a lesson. The attack into a conversation. Her voice never raised. Her eyes never watered. Her back never bent. Tyler's smirk faded for the first time. He leaned into Jason. She thinks she's clever. Jason shrugged. She won't last. But deep inside, all four troublemakers felt it. This one was different. And she wasn't going anywhere. By the next morning, the hallways of Westbridge buzzed. Room 204 was already notorious, but now it had a new layer of intrigue, Miss Harris. The young black teacher who didn't flinch. Who didn't cry. Who turned insults into grammar lessons and threw back the chaos with nothing but words. Tyler's crew didn't talk much in first period. They were planning. You sure the cap's tight? Jason asked, inspecting the water bottle. Tighter than your future, Brittany smirked. Malcolm said nothing. But when he glanced at the rigged bottle meant for Kendra's desk, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe. Or shame. Second period. The bell rang. Students shuffled in. Kendra walked in 5 seconds later, right on time. She looked immaculate again, this time in a crisp white blouse. Not a single crease on her slacks. Her hair tied tighter than before. If she suspected anything, it didn't show. She greeted the class with that same calm, even voice and placed her bag beside her desk. Then she reached for the water bottle. Crack. A hiss. A spray. The bottle burst open, soaking her blouse instantly. The cold water clung to her fabric, outlining every detail in humiliating clarity. The class erupted. Jason cackled. Brittany lifted her phone and shouted, Welcome to Westbridge, Miss Harris. Tyler leaned back in his chair, triumphant. Didn't think you'd fall for it that easy, he laughed. Kendra stood perfectly still. Not frozen in shock, but calculating. The water dripped from her collar. She looked down, exhaled, and then. She laughed. Not a fragile, wounded sound. But a strong, full-bodied laugh that echoed through the classroom like a challenge. You know, she said, brushing her wet hair behind her ear, for pranksters, you three are incredibly organized. I mean, Tyler, the leader. Brittany, the media team. Jason, the mastermind. The laughter died quickly. Tyler's eyes narrowed. Then she picked up the pink envelope on her desk, its ink already running from the spray. She opened it slowly. I'm guessing this was supposed to be the grand finale. She cleared her throat and read it aloud. Miss Harris, your white blouse reminds me of innocence and things you'll never touch. Signed, a white admirer. She paused. The room tensed. Honestly, she said dryly, your metaphor game is weak. Innocence. That's the best you've got. Jason's jaw twitched. Brittany's phone lowered an inch. Malcolm stared. Kendra folded the letter, then looked directly at Jason. That handwriting's familiar. Let me guess. Same artist behind the caricatures on desk 3 last week. Jason flushed deep red. The rest of the class fell dead silent. Even the students who'd once cowered at the back sat up. Kendra stepped out from behind the desk, drenched, her blouse clinging to her, and yet her posture was more regal than ever. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She made eye contact with every student in the room and said, "If you think water is enough to scare me off, you've severely underestimated where I've been. I didn't come here to be liked. I came here to teach. And if any of you want to test me again, just know, I pass every test." The words struck like thunder. Not loud, but undeniable. Tyler leaned forward. "You think this makes you strong?" Kendra walked directly up to his desk, her voice calm and measured. "I've seen children dodge bullets to get to school. I've seen mothers walk miles for clean water. You think you scare me? You're a rich kid with a bad haircut and too much time on his hands." A few students gasped. Even Jason swallowed hard. Kendra didn't blink. "You're not a villain, Tyler. You're a scared little boy pretending to be one." Tyler's hands clenched. His voice cracked when he spoke. "You're just a substitute. You won't last." Kendra took a breath. "Let's see who lasts longer." The class fell into complete silence. No camera flashed. No chair squeaked. Kendra turned back to the board, still dripping wet, picked up the chalk, and continued with the lesson like nothing had happened. Behind her, Brittany slowly lowered her phone and hit delete. Jason tucked his sketchbook under his arm. Malcolm finally leaned forward. Tyler sat still, fists tight, face pale. But no one dared speak. Not anymore. That night, silence clung to room 204 like mist after a storm. No one dared speak of the humiliation that had backfired. The water prank, intended to drench Miss Harris in shame, had instead washed away the last traces of control the bullies thought they had. Kendra hadn't yelled. Hadn't reported them. Hadn't even paused her lesson. She had owned the moment. The whispers started spreading. She didn't flinch. She made Tyler look dumb in front of everyone. She read the note out loud like she didn't even care. The next morning, something was different in the air. Kendra's name echoed down the halls, not with ridicule, but awe. Students peered through the windows of room 204 before class, eyes wide with curiosity. Even kids who'd never cared about English started arriving early. Inside, Tyler sat hunched in his chair, staring at the desk. His posture was different now, less commanding, more closed in. Brittany walked in with her hoodie pulled low, lips pressed tight. Jason slinked to his seat without a word. Malcolm, as always, was the last to enter. But today, he stopped briefly beside Kendra's desk and gave her a nod. The smallest of acknowledgments. She nodded back. No one had ever dared nod to a teacher in Tyler's presence before. Not without consequences. The lesson began. "Today, we'll talk about empathy," Kendra said, her voice smooth as silk. In Harper Lee's novel, Atticus Finch tells his daughter, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view." Her eyes scanned the room. "Let's try that. I want you to write about a moment you felt misunderstood. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Just honest." The room stayed still. Until, slowly, one hand raised. "Brittany." The girl who once snickered at every lesson now stared at her paper, then up at Kendra. "Can we write it, like a letter?" Kendra smiled. "Absolutely." A rustle followed, pages turning, pencils scratching. Even Jason picked up his pen, chewing on its cap before writing his first sentence. Malcolm tapped his desk once, then started writing without looking up. Tyler remained frozen, arms crossed. But his jaw tightened. Kendra walked between the rows quietly, reading snippets. Brittany wrote, "You think I'm mean. I'm not. I just hate being the joke, so I make others the joke first." Jason, "My dad says boys don't cry. But I cry. At night. When he's drunk and loud." Malcolm, "I hate how quiet I am. But if I speak, they'll hear me." By the end of class, the air had changed again. No one tossed paper. No one muttered under their breath. The energy felt, heavier, but honest. As the bell rang, Kendra stood at the front, watching them leave. A few students lingered, eyes flicking toward her, unsure if they were allowed to say, "Thank you," yet. She didn't need them to. She just smiled. But then, Tyler stopped at the door. Just for a moment. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her. But he hesitated. And in that hesitation, something unspoken began to shift. That afternoon, in the teacher's lounge, the chatter was louder than usual. Someone had heard about the prank. Someone else had heard that Kendra read a hate letter out loud, and laughed. "She's still here?" asked Mr. Givens, the math teacher. "Not just here," said Ms. Lively from Social Studies, lowering her voice. They listened. They actually listened. But not everyone was impressed. "She's just the flavor of the week," said another voice. "Give it time. They'll turn on her." Kendra entered just as the comment ended. She heard it. But she didn't react. She poured herself a cup of tea, then pulled out a folder filled with hand-drawn student letters and essays. On the top page was Jason's cartoon of Atticus Finch standing tall in a courtroom. Next to him, Tom Robinson wasn't in chains. He was standing, too. Kendra flipped through them slowly, the corners of her lips curving upward. The next morning, the classroom felt different once again. Posters of Jason's drawings had been neatly pinned to the walls. Quotes from the students' letters, anonymous, but powerful, were now printed on colorful cardstock and placed at the front. "I'm not what you think I am. I want to be better. I just want to be seen." Kendra stood at the podium and said only one thing. "This is your class. Let's make it worth it." She opened her planner. But before she could begin, a voice spoke up. It was Malcolm. Quiet Malcolm. Stone-faced, lean Malcolm. "I have something I want to read." The class turned. Brittany blinked. Jason froze. Even Tyler looked up. Malcolm stood, a folded paper in hand. He cleared his throat and began. "I used to think silence was strength. That if I didn't speak, no one could use my words against me. But silence is just fear with a fancy name. Miss Harris showed me that strength isn't in keeping quiet. It's in standing up, even when you're the only one standing." No one moved. No one laughed. Brittany's fingers tugged at her sleeves. Jason stared, unmoving. And Tyler. He didn't look away this time. Tyler didn't clap. He didn't blink. He just sat there, stock still, as Malcolm's final words echoed in the still classroom. Kendra gave Malcolm a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said softly. That took courage. Malcolm shrugged and slid back into his seat, but there was a visible shift in him, his shoulders lighter, his eyes no longer so guarded. As the lesson continued, a strange energy flowed through the room. It wasn't excitement or fear. It was something newer. Something delicate. It was respect. Kendra didn't gloat. She didn't point fingers. She simply picked up where she'd left off. Let's break into small groups and discuss Atticus Finch's courtroom speech. Focus on how courage is communicated through calm action, not violence. Even that simple instruction was met without complaint. The usual grumbles, the snide comments, they didn't come. Students shuffled into groups without protest. Brittany scooted her desk next to Aaliyah's. Jason even turned to Malik and said, "Wanna team up?" like it was the most natural thing in the world. Kendra moved between the clusters, listening more than she spoke. She heard thoughtful questions. Real dialogue. Actual learning. She smiled, but only briefly. She knew better than to believe it was over. She could feel it in the air, Tyler wasn't finished. Not yet. He sat in the corner group, his arms crossed, saying nothing. But his eyes flicked toward Kendra every few seconds, like a chess player watching the board, calculating. Later that day, during lunch, Tyler sat alone for the first time. He picked at a tray of cold fries, glancing at his phone. A few texts from Jason, "You good?" and "That was wild today." He didn't reply. Because something unfamiliar had begun to gnaw at him. Doubt. For years, Tyler had controlled room 204 with intimidation and reputation. His father, a wealthy local businessman, had always told him, "You lead by showing people they're weaker than you. That's how respect works." And it had worked, for a while. Until now. Until a petite black woman with a warm voice and a spine of steel walked into his world and flipped it upside down without raising hers. He remembered her face when he stood up and challenged her. She hadn't even flinched. She'd walked straight up to him, fearless, calm. She hadn't humiliated him. She'd seen him. And that scared him more than any punishment ever had. That afternoon, when the final bell rang, Tyler lingered behind in the classroom. Kendra was wiping down the whiteboard, her back to him. He hesitated at the door. "Miss Harris." She turned slowly. "Yes." He paused. Then forced the words out like they burned his throat. "I'm not used to someone like you." Her expression remained neutral. "What do you mean? You don't get mad. You don't back off. You're not scared of us." "I'm not here to be scared," she said plainly. Tyler scratched his neck. "You make it look easy. It's not." The room filled with a silence that wasn't awkward, just honest. Tyler shoved his hands into his hoodie pocket. "I've made a lot of people quit." "I know." He looked down. "I thought you'd be one of them." "I know that too." He didn't say sorry. Not yet. But the crack in his armor had widened. Kendra didn't push. She just nodded once and returned to erasing the board. Tyler stood there for a moment longer before walking out without another word. The next day was different again. It wasn't a dramatic shift, no parade, no speech. But it was real. Jason passed out handouts before Kendra even asked. Brittany raised her hand and asked if they could watch a documentary to supplement the novel. Malcolm took notes so fast Kendra had to slow down the lecture. And Tyler? Tyler came in, sat down, and opened his book. That's it. No smirk. No eye roll. But he stayed. At the end of class, after the final bell, he walked up to her desk, pulled something out of his backpack, and set it down. A drawing. A pencil sketch of a classroom, students working, laughing, and in the center, a teacher at the board. But she wasn't teaching. She was listening. Kendra looked up at him. "I didn't know you could draw." "I don't show people," he said. Figured maybe, this one was okay. Kendra took a deep breath. "It's more than okay. Thank you." He turned to leave. But at the door, he paused. "I still don't like school," he said. Kendra smiled. "You don't have to like it. You just have to respect the people in it." He nodded once and walked out. And for the first time since she stepped into Westbridge High, Kendra sat down and let herself exhale. Not because the war was over, but because, finally, the walls had started to crack. And through those cracks, the light was beginning to pour in. The cracks spread, quietly, steadily, and unmistakably. Room 204, once a war zone of paper airplanes and whispered slurs, had begun to feel like a classroom. Not a perfect one, but a real one. The kind where voices were heard instead of shouted over, where even silence meant thought, not fear. Kendra Harris noticed every shift. Jason Miller was no longer hiding behind snide comments and doodles meant to humiliate. His sketches now filled the classroom walls, illustrated quotes from To Kill a Mockingbird, hand-drawn portraits of literary characters, even a comic strip where Atticus Finch squared off against a villain labeled Ignorance in bold, block letters. Kendra had quietly stapled that one above her desk. Brittany Clark, who once mocked anything outside her world of cruelty and control, had begun asking questions that revealed more depth than anyone expected. Miss Harris, she said one day during group discussion, do you think Atticus defended Tom Robinson because he saw himself in him? Like, not literally, but, you know, in how they were both misunderstood. A few students glanced up, surprised. Kendra's response was immediate. That's a powerful observation, Brittany. Yes, I do think Atticus saw the injustice and chose to stand up against it, even when he knew he'd lose. That kind of courage, it's rare. Brittany nodded, slowly, like the idea was reshaping something inside her. But it was Malcolm who stunned them all. When Kendra assigned a short essay on justice, Malcolm submitted 4 full pages, raw, personal, and piercing. I used to think justice was a myth. That people like me, quiet, black, poor, had to accept what the world gave. But I'm starting to see that justice isn't about who yells the loudest. It's about who stands their ground, even when no one's watching. Miss Harris does that. Maybe I can too. Kendra read it 3 times before writing anything in the margins. She circled the final sentence and wrote, "You already are." She returned the paper the next day without comment. But Malcolm smiled when he read it, folded the paper, and tucked it into his backpack like a keepsake. Even the dynamics outside class began to shift. During lunch, Brittany waved Aaliyah over and offered her a seat. Jason stopped another student from mocking Malik's accent and muttered, "That's not cool, man," before walking away. None of it was theatrical. None of it felt performative. It was just, different. But not everyone celebrated the change. In the staff lounge, some teachers still grumbled. "She's trying too hard," one muttered. "This isn't a therapy session," another added. "It's a high school." Yet others, the ones who'd long since given up hope for change, sat a little straighter when Kendra walked in. "She's doing something we couldn't," Ms. Lively said. "She made them care." Mr. Givens rubbed his jaw. "She made them human." Meanwhile, the principal, Mr. Atwood, a tall man with a permanent frown etched into his forehead, called Kendra into his office one morning. "I've been hearing things," he said, not looking up from his desk. Kendra waited. Parents. Teachers. Even students. He paused. Looked up. "Room 204, is quiet." "I wouldn't call it quiet," Kendra replied with a slight smile. "I'd call it, engaged." Atwood didn't smile back. But he did nod. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. "And Harris?" "Yes. Don't burn out." She left the office with more questions than answers. But also, more resolve. She returned to room 204 to find a note taped to her desk. Neatly folded. No glitter, no pranks. Inside, written in surprisingly neat script. "Thank you for seeing us. Not just the good parts. The ugly ones too." It wasn't signed. She didn't need a signature. That afternoon, she introduced a new project: Letter to My Future Self. Write to who you hope to be, she said. Tell them what you're afraid of now, and what you hope to overcome. Jason wrote about being scared his dreams were too small for a world that expects more. Brittany confessed that sometimes she couldn't recognize her own reflection, because I spent so long pretending to be meaner than I am. Malcolm wrote that he hoped to become a voice, not just an echo. And Tyler? Tyler stared at his blank page for nearly 30 minutes. His pencil hovered. Dropped. Hovered again. Then he wrote 3 sentences. I'm not sure who I want to be. But I know I don't want to be this. I don't want to lead people the wrong way anymore. If you're reading this, I hope you found a better path. He folded the letter and placed it in a box like everyone else. Kendra didn't read it. She wouldn't. That letter wasn't for her. But the act of writing it, that was the real change. By the end of that week, Room 204 had become something else entirely. Students no longer rushed to leave the moment the bell rang. They lingered. Helped clean up. Asked questions about college, careers, the future. And on Friday afternoon, just before dismissal, something happened that stunned even Kendra. Tyler raised his hand. Not sarcastically. Not to challenge. Just raised it. Yes, Tyler? Kendra asked, her voice even. He cleared his throat. Do you think people who did bad things, but want to be better, do they deserve another shot? She paused. Not because she didn't have the answer. But because she wanted him to feel the weight of it. I think the only way we grow is if we allow ourselves and others the space to change, she said. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It just makes them worth facing. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. And then he sat back down. The room was so quiet, you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. When the final bell rang, no one moved for a few seconds. Then slowly, students rose, not to escape, but as if leaving something sacred behind. Kendra stood by the door, watching them go. One by one. No mocking. No eye rolls. No chaos. Just quiet, thoughtful departures. And as Tyler walked past her, he stopped. Ms. Harris? Yes. I deleted that video, he said. The one with the water. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Then added, almost under his breath. I'm sorry. She didn't smile. Not yet. But she did say, I know. And in that moment, she didn't just win the room. She earned it. By Monday morning, Room 204 had become a quiet legend at Westbridge High. Not because of chaos, but because of something no one had expected, peace. Teachers peeked through the windows. Students from other classes whispered in the halls. Everyone wanted to know what was happening in the room where the wolves used to run wild, and now sat calmly, heads down, actually learning. The most remarkable thing wasn't just the silence. It was the participation. Brittany no longer leaned back in her chair, daring someone to challenge her. Instead, she leaned forward, hands folded, eyes focused, asking thoughtful questions and occasionally jotting down notes that had nothing to do with test answers and everything to do with real understanding. Jason had joined the art club, and at Kendra's gentle encouragement, submitted a portfolio to the district's student illustration contest. One of his pieces, The Silent Defender, depicted a black woman standing before a crowd of faceless people, holding nothing but a book. It would later win second place. Malcolm, once a silent fixture in the back, now regularly helped lead literature discussions. When another student struggled to understand the symbolic layers of the courtroom scene in To Kill a Mockingbird, Malcolm said, "It's not just about race. It's about silence. And what happens when people watch injustice and say nothing?" That quote made its way to the school newspaper's Quote of the Week board. But the most delicate, the most significant change, was Tyler. He no longer came in late. no longer made a show of leaning back with crossed arms. His hoodie stayed on, but he pulled out his notebook when the lesson started. And though he didn't speak often, he listened, really listened. One afternoon, during a class discussion about character transformation, Tyler raised his hand. He didn't make eye contact, but his voice was clear. "I think, people change when they finally see the damage they caused. Not just what they did, but what they stopped others from doing." Kendra turned to him. "Can you give an example?" He looked straight ahead. "I used to shut people down. Make sure no one spoke up. Because if they did, it made me feel small. And I didn't like feeling small." The room didn't gasp. Didn't mock. They listened. And for the first time, Tyler didn't just survive the silence. He owned it. That evening, long after the last bell had rung, Kendra sat at her desk, grading essays. The school was quiet, bathed in golden sunset light. On her desk were piles of notebooks, a cold cup of tea, and the locked box that held the students' letters to my future self. She hadn't opened a single one. But she didn't need to. She could see the answers unfolding in front of her every day. She stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the sports field. Tyler was out there with Jason, passing a soccer ball back and forth. Brittany sat nearby, braiding Aaliyah's hair while laughing softly. Malcolm was leaned against a tree, sketchbook open, nodding as he drew something none of them could see yet. And for the first time in weeks, Kendra let herself cry. Not out of sadness. Not even relief. But something much deeper. Pride. Because she had walked into room 204 fully expecting to fight. Instead, she built. The next morning, she began a new unit, poetry. At first, the room groaned. Poetry had never gone over well at Westbridge. It was often dismissed as soft, boring, weird. But Kendra had a different plan. "We're not reading dead poets today," she said. "We're writing our own." "Wait," Jason said, "like, actually?" Kendra grinned. "Yes. Today's prompt, write a poem titled, 'I Used to Be.'" Silence. Then the sound of pen scratching. Some students wrote quickly. Others hesitated, then slowly began. Malik's poem read. "I used to be shadows in a loud room. Now I'm a whisper with weight. I used to flinch at eye contact. Now I meet it with fire." Brittany. "I used to laugh to cover silence. I used to cut before I was cut. But I heard myself echo once. And hated what I sounded like." Malcolm. "I used to disappear. I still do, sometimes. But now, I choose when. And I always return." And Tyler? His was the shortest. But it hit the hardest. "I used to lead a pack. I led them nowhere. Now I follow a voice. That doesn't need to shout." When Tyler finished reading it aloud, no one clapped. No one needed to. The stillness in the room was its own standing ovation. Later, in the teacher's lounge, Mr. Atwood stopped Kendra. "I heard what you're doing with poetry," he said, scratching his temple awkwardly. "Didn't think that would fly at Westbridge." Kendra sipped her coffee. "Turns out, kids have a lot to say if you actually listen." He nodded. "You're doing something here, Harris. Something real." And then, with a small smile, he added, "Keep going." She did. Every day, she came back. Not because it was easy, but because now, it was worth it. Every day, room 204 filled with students who once tried to break her, now learning to build themselves. And every day, Kendra stood in front of that class, not just as their teacher, but as the mirror that made them finally see who they were capable of becoming. Spring crept into Westbridge High with longer days and softer mornings. The hall still buzzed, lockers still slammed, but something was undeniably different, especially inside room 204. It no longer smelled like fear. It smelled like pencils, clean desks, and sometimes, oddly enough, vanilla candles, Brittany's idea during a classroom redesign project. Once considered the battlefield of the school, room 204 had transformed into the place students lingered in even after the bell rang. And yet, change, real change, isn't just marked by peace. It's measured in what students do when no one is watching. On the final Friday of the quarter, the school held its annual Community Day. Each homeroom was assigned a theme. Kendra's was Legacy. She didn't assign a project. Instead, she posed a question. What do you want to leave behind? Jason suggested a mural. Brittany wanted to film a documentary. Malcolm said, why not both? And Tyler, once the tyrant of the room, offered something simple. We build something that stays, he said. So that next year's class knows we were here. And that we changed. By Monday, room 204 had become a small production studio. Jason worked on a massive mural in the back wall, one half in black and white, showing a chaotic classroom of torn pages and angry faces. The other half was vivid, alive with color, open books, raised hands, students smiling. In the center was a figure not labeled teacher or Ms. Harris, but simply, the one who stayed. Brittany filmed interviews with students, staff, and even a few reluctant teachers. She asked questions like, when did you first feel seen, and what changed you this year? To everyone's surprise, the footage was raw, vulnerable, and powerful. Malcolm organized poetry readings during lunch, inviting students who once felt voiceless to share their words aloud, trembling but proud. Some cried. Some laughed. All were heard. And Tyler? Tyler didn't speak much during those weeks. But he worked harder than anyone. He painted. He organized. He held the ladder for Jason, fetched microphones for Brittany, and nodded silently during every poem. Then, just 2 days before Community Day, he asked Kendra if he could share something. Of course, she said. He handed her a printed letter, folded in thirds. You can read it now, he said, or later. She waited until she got home that night. She sat on her worn couch, warm tea by her side, and unfolded the page with care. Dear Miss Harris. I used to think being feared meant I mattered. I used to think hurting others kept me from being hurt. I used to think people like you didn't last here. But you did. And I watched you. I saw how you didn't break. I saw how you didn't run. I saw how you looked at us, even when we didn't deserve it. Like we were more than our worst moments. You made me believe I could be more than mine. I don't think I'm a good person yet. But I know I want to be. And that's because of you. So, thank you. Tyler. She didn't cry. Not at first. But the moment she read the line, I know I want to be, something deep inside her cracked open. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming weight of impact. Of purpose. On Community Day, the hallway outside room 204 was packed. Students from other grades, parents, even teachers who rarely stepped beyond their own corners of the school, came to see what the buzz was about. They saw the mural. Watched the mini-documentary, projected on the classroom wall. Listened to poetry. Some stood in silence. Others wiped tears. Mr. Atwood, the principal, leaned against the doorway and watched as one of the most disruptive students in school history, Tyler Brooks, stood beside Malik and Brittany, showing a group of freshmen around the room and saying, this was where everything changed. A few teachers approached Kendra with tentative admiration. You really did something here, said Ms. Lively. You lit a fire where most of us gave up trying to spark anything. Kendra smiled, humble as ever. They did it themselves. I just stood still long enough for them to believe they could. Later that day, as the crowds thinned, Kendra sat at her desk. She looked around the room, the laughter, the shared desks, the eraser dust from a day's worth of scribbling, real learning, not just academic. Her eyes settled on the back wall. The mural. Underneath it, students had written their names in small letters, around one phrase that had become their silent motto. We were the wolves. Now, we're the ones who protect the pack. Kendra traced it with her eyes. And for the first time since she stepped into room 204, she allowed herself to believe something that had once seemed impossible. Not only had she survived the wolves, she had taught them how to lead. And somewhere in that, she'd taught herself, too. That courage wasn't in perfection. It was in staying. In standing. In listening. And never backing down, even when everything inside you wanted to run. What do you believe is the greatest force for change, fear or forgiveness? This is more than just the story of a teacher and her students. It's about what happens when someone decides to see people not for who they are, but for who they could become. Because sometimes, the strongest leaders are the ones who speak softly, but never, ever move. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs encouragement. Comment below, what would you have done in Kendra's shoes? Or Tyler's? And don't forget to subscribe to True Echo, where real courage finds its voice.